Hey, Divya, how are you?
Hello. Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's so good. I'm so happy to have you here and appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, before we dive into MSK Serverless, why don't we talk a little bit about you and your role? Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Divya Sridhar. I am a senior product manager with the Amazon MSK team. And I'm here to talk to you about our latest launch, MSK Serverless.
Cool. Sounds good. So, I'll kick off with the first question since I'm like the sales guy. I'll start with the easy one. What does MSK stand for?
Great question. So, MSK stands for Amazon Managed Streaming for Apache Kafka. It's a fully managed service, which makes it easy for customers to run Apache Kafka workloads on AWS.
Sweet.
I'm a big fan of Kafka. Been using Kafka, for a long time now in various projects and things and work related. I like where Kafka came from. I'm really curious. Could you tell us more for those who haven't used it before? What is Apache Kafka, and maybe why did we pick to do a managed service for Kafka?
Sure. Let me talk about that. Before I talk about what Kafka is, let me set some stage around what data streaming is all about, and that keys right into what Kafka is all about. So data streaming is basically streams of records that is produced by thousands of data sources, which typically sends in these data records simultaneously. And there's a need to process these records sequentially and in real time. There are lots of examples of data streaming. For example, customer log activity in your mobile or web applications, e-commerce purchases, telemetry from connected devices. The list is really endless. And when all of this data comes in and it is processed, you can run analysis on it to generate real-time data insights. And analysis could be things around data transformations, aggregations, sampling, etc. And the insights that is generated from analyzing these data streams is going to give you the ability to make key business decisions based on real-time data. So, for example, I can figure out the customer sentiment around a brand or a product by simply analyzing, sentiment coming in from various social media platforms in real time. And I can use this insight to then make an informed decision around the product when the need arises. So, data streaming really powers data agility and empowers businesses to make decisions in real time. So, now that we understand what data streaming is, we can now talk more about Apache Kafka, right? Because Apache Kafka is essentially open source or distributed data store that is optimized to ingest and process this data streaming records in real time. And what Apache Kafka does is three main things. It's going to allow you to publish and subscribe to streams of records. It stores these streams of records as and when it comes in the order in which it was actually generated. And third, it also allows you to process these data streams in real time. So it essentially combines the benefits of storage, messaging, and stream processing to power real time data streaming pipelines and streaming applications that build off of these data streams. So customers can use the data that is stored in Kafka to perform either real-time analytics or even historical analysis because you get this capability to store the data within the Kafka clusters.
Yeah, Divya, I think when I first started working with Kafka, probably back in about 2017, I think I totally misunderstood it at first. I looked at it and I saw, oh, this is another way to do like queuing or event processing or something. And that's not really Kafka's strong suit. You could do that. It's not precluded from that use case. But I'll give you an example. My first use case that I found that really worked well with Kafka. I was working at a company called Box, and Box has an event log of everything that happens in this document repository that Box builds for its customers. So every single event would flow through this log, and you could actually capture those events from an API layer. But getting those events from the API into whatever system you wanted to do data analysis on or security monitoring on was kind of tough, right? Especially with more queue-based things. So I had found Kafka at that point, and I had built a solution around it where those events, since they're always coming in, right? This is a always flowing kind of data stream, would tap into Kafka on one side and then be able to go move into whatever system I wanted on the other side. And that's when it really started clicking for me. Do you think that's a good example, maybe for the audience to understand?
Yeah, I think that's a great example that you called out, right? So, how Kafka really differentiates from messaging services that are, say, queuing based is because it really ties a little bit in terms of how Kafka actually works. So it combines the benefits of messaging frameworks like queuing and publish subscribe, and brings the benefits of both of these models to customers. So what Kafka does is, when you look at queuing, right? So in queuing, it supports for multiple consumer instances, but it doesn't allow for multiple subscribers to read the data. The publish subscribe model in the messaging frame is a messaging framework which allows for multiple subscribers, but then this message goes to all the subscribers out there. So it doesn't allow for the workload to be distributed across multiple work streams. So no parallelism there. So Kafka remedies these two shortcomings, and what it does is it writes data into what are called topics. So what happens is when data is written in to a topic is actually comprised of what are called partitions, and a partition is nothing but a committed structured log. And it is made up of multiple log segments where each of the data records is a segment, with the new data that is coming in is appended to these log segments in real time. So when a customer writes data into Kafka, it's written into a topic, and Kafka automatically writes this data into multiple partitions within the topic, and it places these partitions across multiple servers within the cluster. So when consumers are reading data from the topic, they actually read from different partitions within the topic. So it allows for parallelism. And also different consumers can read the data at different paces because Kafka allows replayability. So they don't get in each other's way when they're trying to consume this data. So it really decouples customers' architectures, and you could have applications sending in data and multiple applications reading this data to either perform real-time analysis or historical analysis, and really shape up your data streaming architectures to suit your specific use cases.
That's awesome. So I wanted to bring up one quick comment that Tommy threw out there, and he's saying that he already has MSK. He's curious if there's any other supporting services for MSK serverless, like Kinesis, CloudTrail, anything like that. And we may get to that later in your demo, but
yeah, we haven't even heard what serverless means for MSK yet, right?
Yeah, happy to. Let's dive into that as we learn more about MSK and MSK serverless.
Yeah. So given that you've got MSK, talk to me about why there's a need for serverless. Like what problem will you solve by launching this product?
Sure. So we launched MSK in 2019, May of 2019. And the goal there was to make it easy for customers to run Apache Kafka workloads on AWS. Customers were telling us that it is hard to scale and manage these Apache Kafka clusters on their own, especially at production scale. And that was the problem that MSK solved when we launched it in 2019. So it provided customers tons of benefits by abstracting away the infrastructure management from MSK, from customers, so that they could just focus on building data streaming applications while MSK would take care of managing the servers, making sure they're patched and up to date, making sure we monitor the servers that make up the cluster, detect faulty servers, and replace them as and when necessary. Make sure we can orchestrate scaling activities if customer wants to scale up the capacity of the cluster. So a number of operational benefits are tied into Amazon MSK. So customers can really focus on building their data streaming applications. Also, Amazon MSK is fully open source Apache Kafka. It's highly secure and scalable, so customers can really scale and configure their clusters to meet their specific needs, which are fine-tuned to their specific use cases for data streaming. And today, Amazon MSK is used by multiple customers, right? It's part of their data streaming architectures and powers really mission-critical workloads for them. But then we decided to also build this MSK serverless offering based on some of the customer data and feedback we were receiving. So there were sort of 3 key feedback that we were looking to address, and we are addressing with this launch. And it sort of ties to certain use cases where MSK customers found that the configurability that we provide to them is not really helping them out as much. So for example, if you're a customer who has like a cyclical workload and maybe you have a lot of traffic during business hours, but no traffic or low traffic during the weekends and after hours, like say, for example, a banking application, or you have, steady state traffic and then you have, a sudden peak, for example, maybe sales in an e-commerce website, but you have to plan for these peak events during like holidays or some sort of sale event. So this is another scenario where customers were finding it hard to right size the cluster. And a third type of scenario is where a customer is using the cluster for, say, development or testing purposes. So here the traffic to the cluster is very sporadic and unpredictable. So what customers had to do in these kind of scenarios is either they have to scale their clusters up and down to match their sort of usage pattern, which involved a lot of investment on their part to orchestrate the scaling. And if they did go down the path of right sizing the cluster, they also had to sort of deal with what is called partition management, where once you say scale a cluster by adding more servers to it, or brokers is what we call within Amazon MSK, you also then have to move the partitions into the new brokers so that you can utilize the capacity, the newly added capacity, and spread the load across the cluster. So all of these were activities that customers had to undertake to make their clusters performant and get the most out of them. Mm-hmm. And in some scenarios, if customers didn't want to deal with right sizing or scaling, they would just end up over provisioning the cluster and end up paying for idle time. So we wanted to really solve for all these key problems and provide a more managed experience for customers. And that's where Amazon MSK Serverless comes in. So what MSK Serverless does is it makes it really easy for you to get started with Apache Kafka. It provides you on-demand streaming capacity. You don't have to deal with deciding how many brokers you want to provision, what's the size of the brokers, and what's the size of the storage attached to the broker. So all of that is abstracted away from the customer experience. So you simply create a cluster with a few clicks and you can start sending your data in. And the cluster is going to scale automatically based on your throughput needs. And as long as you're operating within the parameters of the limits supported by the serverless offering, you are good to go, and you don't have to worry about auto scaling or partition management. And with respect to price, if you have these kind of cyclical workloads where right sizing is hard, you don't have to worry about paying for idle capacity because it's throughput-based pricing, so you pay for only what you use. So MSK Serverless is basically allowing you to get started with Apache Kafka really quickly.
That's awesome. I love that, mainly because it's kind of an Amazonian thing that what AWS has given our customers is not not pushing you in one direction or another, but giving you the tools to do what you want to achieve. So we still have queuing services if you need something that's a little more lightweight. We still got MSK if you still want to get your hands involved. And then now we have this serverless offering to make it easier for those who just don't want to deal with the underlying architecture of it all. That's awesome.
Most customers are not in the business of managing clusters or like things like Zookeeper around Kafka, right? And keeping Kafka clusters resilient and things like that. Like that's not their line of business typically, right? And so it's kind of a distraction from
it. And even if you're good at it, you know, like that's just something I don't want to worry about going forward, right? Let me think bigger on my business and not have to worry about the cluster.
Divya, you've got a demo, right? I'm sorry, I don't want to, but I know we're running close on time.
Yeah, let's hop into the demo and see the service in action. But I also wanted to say Amazon MSK does manage your Zookeeper for you. So it doesn't matter whether you're using serverless or MSK. So take care of Zookeeper for you.
It's beautiful.
All right. So you are seeing my screen now. So we'll do a quick demo to see, MSK serverless in action. So this is the serverless the landing page for Amazon MSK. I'm just going to refresh it to make sure I've not been signed out. That way everything works perfectly, right? So I can go ahead and start creating a cluster, which will be the first portion of the demo where I'm going to show you how to create a serverless cluster. Like I said, it's going to be fairly straightforward. You could just use the quick create method here, which is going to configure your cluster with some best practices settings. So it makes it even easier for you to get started. You have the default option of going with the serverless cluster. And like I said, the offering comes with certain limits. So with respect to throughput, it's 200 Mbps per second and 400 for read throughput. And as you can see, these are some of the settings that the cluster comes with in terms of the VPC that is attached, that is associated with the cluster, the security group, and the access control method, which is IAM or Identity Access Management, which is what MSK Serverless is integrated with for secure client access. You could add tags later on, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to skip that. One other detail I want to quickly show you is if I just clicked on provision, just to show you what that would look like. Here you see you have to configure more things in terms of the Kafka version, the broker size, the number of brokers, the storage size, and you also have to you could change the customer the cluster configuration as well if you wanted to. But with MSK Serverless, you don't have to configure any of that. You could just go ahead and click on create cluster, and the cluster creation process is going to get started. So the important note here is that you have to configure your IAM policy to make sure you can establish the access path between your client and your cluster. And at least while this cluster is sort of creating and baking in, I'm going to sort of switch and show you a couple of clusters that I've already created for the purposes of this demo. So we have two different clusters that we'll be using in the demo today. One is the MSK Serverless demo cluster. And in this cluster, what we'll do is we'll log into a client instance and we'll produce and consume to an MSK Serverless cluster and to a provision cluster. So we use two clusters in the demo, and we'll see how easy it is to switch your client applications to MSK Serverless from a provision cluster by simply changing the connection strings. So to find the connection strings for a cluster, you have to click on View Client Information, and then you'll get the endpoint that you can use to connect to the cluster. Similarly, we have one more cluster, which is the provision cluster. And this is the cluster right here. And again, here you could click on the view client information and grab the endpoint so that you could use it to connect to the cluster from the client instance. So both of these clusters are configured for IAM, and I've already set up my access policies so that my client can connect to the cluster. So let's jump into the client instance and start producing and consuming.
It sounds like you're not going to have to change anything to connect to either one of them, though, right? Same connections, like same style format. You will change the actual connection strings, but
yeah,
I don't want to steal your thunder. But that's what it's sounding like, and it's exciting.
You could essentially set up your IAM policy to allow permissions for your client to connect to both the clusters, right? And you could make sure like all your networking is set up correctly, and then all you have to do then is switch out your client connection string because the connection string maps directly to the cluster that you're connecting to. So here I have I've opened up a cloud-based IDE, and I'm going to log into my EC2 instance where I have already had my client set up. And I'm basically going to create two different sessions on the same instance so that I can show both the produce and the consume of data from the cluster. So let me go ahead and start signing into my instance first. And maybe I'll increase the font size.
Yeah, just a bit. I was going to ask, but I didn't want to break your flow.
Yeah, I just remember that it could be hard to view.
There we go. That's good.
All right, so I am going to first sign in here. Since I already have this client instance configured for Kafka, I'm just going to directly, switch to my Kafka folder so that I can start running my Kafka commands. So the first thing that I'm going to do is produce and consume from my provisioned cluster, which is the MSK standard MSK offering. So I'm going to grab my connection string first here. And I'm going to set it up. And this is essentially the connection string that I showed in the previous window. I'm going to set it up in both of my sessions. So I'll use the left-hand side as a producer and my right-hand side as a consumer. So what I'll first do is I'll go ahead and create a topic in the producer side. And as you can see, the topic is created. So I'm going to fire up a console producer. Now this is the command to start producing data into my Kafka cluster, which is basically identified by this Bootstrap broker string here. Also, what I'll do is I will fire up a consumer on the other side so that as and when I'm producing this data, I can read. So first portion of...
There it goes.
That's cool.
So you can see that as I'm writing the data, you can see it surface in the consumer side. So the consumer is able to read the data from the Kafka cluster in real time. So I'm just going to exit this for now. And then we go into the second part of the demo where I'm going to switch the Bootstrap broker strings. So now I'm going to define the Bootstrap broker string and set it to the MSK serverless cluster. So I will use this command over here, and I will do the same thing on my right-hand side as well. And then I will go ahead and, create a topic on the producer side. I'm using the same topic name because it's a different cluster that I'm connecting to, but if you were connecting to the same cluster, you wouldn't be able to do that. So I got the message that the topic is created. So I will then go ahead and fire up a producer. And consumer on my other session. It looks like the producer is ready to go. And let's start. Producing. There you go. It's not reading from the beginning because as you can see, I didn't set it to set this command to read from the beginning, but if you could add an additional command to your when you initiate your consumer, and that way it's going to read either from the beginning or from the end. There are various ways in which you can configure the command to ensure you can read from wherever you want to pick the data from. So that's kind of the essence of the demo. And you were able to see how you could easily switch between the provision cluster and the serverless cluster by simply updating the connection string.
Yeah, that was a true like nothing up my sleeves type demo, right? Like where you really showed us like the impact to your client's code is minimal, right? It's a configuration detail, basically.
Right.
You don't have to change libraries. You don't have to change clients. You don't have to do anything except sub in a different connection string. And then you get to benefit from having a serverless cluster now, which, Divya, I'll be honest, you had me in the beginning with serverless already. That's all you had to say. I was already on board.
Well, I've basically demonstrated it is that easy.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, so since I jumped the gun on Tommy's question, let me bring this back one up again now. Is there any other supporting services? I'm assuming just from your demo, it looks like it. Whatever you have support for.
Yeah, absolutely. So just like Amazon MSK serverless is also deeply integrated with a number of AWS services, right? So we want to continue to provide the same value and make it easy for you to get started with MSK serverless. So just as an example, we integrate with AWS Private Link for private connectivity. And I had already called out AWS IAM for secure client access in the demo. Other sort of noteworthy sort of integrations are for stream processing. We are integrated with AWS Lambda and AWS Kinesis Data Analytics. And we are integrated with Glue Schema Registry for enforcement of the data schemas that are being produced by the clients. So overall, we continue to maintain a lot of integrations with multiple AWS services to make it easy for customers to get started with MSK serverless.
Yeah, and I'll mention too, there's a Kafka Connect, and there's also MSK Connect too, which Kafka, long ago built this Connect portion of Kafka that like was essentially pre-built integrations to various different typical consumers, right? The places where you typically send data to. And I know that we have Amazon MSK Connect too. So I think that's a good resource to go look up and see, does that have support for what you're looking for to integrate with as well?
Yeah, so MSK serverless will work with Kafka Connect as long as you have a network path to reach. Cool. With Amazon MSK Connect specifically, we are actively working on lighting that integration up, and I think we will make it available and to the customer in the coming days.
Awesome, that's great to hear too. All right, well, we're wrapping up here. Divya, where can I go to learn more about MSK and MSK serverless? I know you've got some friends out in the chat helping you. They can maybe drop some links, but where would you tell our audience to go check out more?
Check out our product features page or the AWS News blog, which talks about the serverless launch. You could also look into our documentation, which provides you a lot of details around, how to get started and what are the nitty-gritties of actually getting into the service and setting it up. So go check out all these artifacts and start spinning up your MSK serverless clusters.
That's awesome. Divya, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to see the launch of this. Really appreciate you coming on and giving a deep dive on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.